He's what Oscar Robertson was years ago. He can do it all. You know, if Steve wanted to be, if he tried to be selfish, he can have triple-double after triple-double because he is a rebounding guard. He is a penetrating passing guard. He is a scoring guard. The only thing he hasn't tried to do is be a shot blocker.
He wasn't supposed to make it to the NBA. He had all the odds stacked against him and dealt with adversity after adversity. But he persevered to not only make the NBA, but to become one of its most beloved players in the early 2000s. He was always a threat for an ankle-breaking crossover or highlight reel dunk, and was everything you could ask for in a bridge player during a transition period in Houston. But Steve Francis can get a bad rap nowadays for his perceived attitude problems and consistent clashing with coaches over the course of his career. And it's true that he definitely wasn't a perfect professional, but he had a tough life and wasn't going to roll over for anybody. When he was happy, he played with an unrivaled passion and overall love for the game, which was on full display during his first stint in Houston. Coaching conflict and bad situations defined the rest of his career, which overshadowed his overall body of work. Yeah, he made a lot of plays that would leave you scratching your head, but when he put home a trademark fast break dunk, all was forgiven. And even though his decline came quick, no one can deny how special Steve Francis was. And that's why today we're going to jog your memory and take a look at the career of Stevie Franchise. A Maryland native, Steve Francis lived a tumultuous childhood. His father wasn't present due to serving a 20-year prison sentence for bank robbery, and Francis was raised by his mother and grandmother. Unfortunately, Francis and his family grew up in poverty, and as early as 10 years old, he was dealing drugs to make ends meet. Francis had to find a way for him and his family to survive, and this took priority over school, as he attended 4 different high schools throughout his teen years, and that's twice the amount of high school games he played. Yeah, this future NBA All-Star played a total of 2 high school games in his life. But this isn't a reflection of Francis's commitment, more so than it is due to him dealing with even more adversity. So the future was looking bleak for the young Steve Francis. And then, at the age of 18 years old, he dropped out of school after losing his mother to cancer, and that very easily could have been the end of his story. But luckily, he kept playing basketball around the area and was spotted by coaches of San Jacinto Community College, and they would offer him an opportunity to play college basketball and essentially give him a chance to change his life. And Francis took the opportunity, as he completed his GED and joined the team for the 97 season. And he would excel, as he averaged 13.1 points, 7.1 rebounds, and 6.6 assists, and helped lead the Coyotes to 36 straight wins, but would come up short as they lost in the NJCAA National Tournament. Francis would begin the 98 season in JUCO, however it would not be with San Jacinto, as Francis had taken an opportunity to move closer to home and attend Allegany College of Maryland, and Francis would pick up where he left off, as for the second straight year, he would lead his team to an undefeated season and significantly improve his play, as he would average 25.3 points, 7.1 rebounds, 8.7 assists, and 5.3 steals per game. And according to Francis, this season included a game versus St. Vincent's, who were led by future NBA All-Star Shawn Marion, where Francis reportedly dominated Marion to the tune of a 24-point, 11 assist, 10 rebound, and 10 steal quadruple-double, which Marion apparently has proof of in the form of a VHS recording. So it was clear Francis needed better competition than JUCO had to offer, and he even flirted with the idea of going pro. But with nearly every major program offering him a spot on their team, along with Francis not feeling he was mentally ready for the pros, he decided to stay at home and attend the University of Maryland and play for the Terrapins under Hall of Fame coach Gary Williams. Francis joined a team full of future NBA talent, and although the team had well-established players, he would show quickly that he was head and shoulders above all of them, as he would lead the team in scoring and steals while shooting over 52% from the field and nearly 39% from deep. Francis would score 17 points in his first D1 game and wouldn't look back. The Terrapins would rank as high as number 2 in the nation in a season highlighted by a December 9th win versus number 5 Stanford, in which Francis had 24 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 steals. Maryland played an open court offense, which allowed Francis the freedom to be as creative as he needed to. And by the end of the regular season, Maryland was 25-4 and ranked as a top 5 team in the nation. They would lose to North Carolina in the ACC tournament semifinal, even though Francis scored 31 in this game, but would still enter the NCAA tournament as a 2 seed. They would defeat Valparaiso in the first round, as Francis had 15 points and 7 assists. And then in the second round would defeat Creighton, as Francis had a double-double with 18 points and 13 rebounds, along with 4 steals. However, he would have a game-high 7 turnovers. The Sweet 16 brought St. John's and future NBA Defensive Player of the Year Ron Artest, and their defense would shut the Terps down, as Francis was the only player on the team to score in double figures at just 13 points, and was the only starter to shoot over 30% from the field, but would shoot just 38.5%, as Maryland lost, ending their season. But Francis had made his mark by leading the team to a then-program record of 28 wins, and finishing the year with averages of 17 points, 4.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, and nearly 3 steals per game, en route to being named first team All-ACC and a consensus second team All-American. Initially, Francis planned to return for his senior season, but after talking to people around the league, he was pretty much seen by everyone as a top 3 pick, and that was too good to pass up. So he would declare for the 1999 NBA draft. Elton Brand was selected by the Chicago Bulls first overall. And then,
with the second pick in the 1999 NBA draft, the Vancouver Grizzlies select Steve Francis from the University of Maryland.
A high school dropout who had lived a lifetime in just 22 years had just heard his name called as the second overall pick in the NBA draft. But that doesn't look like the face of a happy man. And it wasn't. There was one place Francis didn't want to play, and that was in Vancouver, which he had made clear prior to the draft. And he had good reason for this. From a career standpoint, it didn't make a lot of sense for him, and he understood that. The Grizzlies had just selected a point guard in the previous year's draft, and he had just finished a first-team all-rookie season for them. So how was Francis going to fit into that scenario? And on top of that, he wanted to be somewhere his family, especially his grandmother, could see him play. And although it may not be the easiest trip for his grandma to go from Maryland to Texas, it was a lot easier than her having to travel internationally to see her grandson play. But for a brief time, Francis was reconsidering playing for Vancouver. But then an incident at a Vancouver airport, where he and the group he was with were mistaken for a rap group, along with contentious contract negotiations, reportedly was the tipping point, and he would demand a trade after this. And a couple months after the draft, on August 27th, he would get his wish, as he was sent to the Rockets, in what was the largest trade in NBA history at the time. Francis joined a Rockets team led by a trio of aging stars, who were coming off 2 straight disappointing first-round playoff exits, as it was clear they needed to begin preparing for life after franchise legend Hakeem Olajuwon. And about a month before the season started, they would lose one of those main pieces, as an unhappy Scottie Pippen was traded to Portland, so Francis would be a day 1 starter under Rudy Tomjanovich. But the Rockets still looked primed to be led by a 37-year-old Olajuwon and a 36-year-old Charles Barkley. But that wouldn't end up being the case. After just 19 games, Barkley ruptured his quadriceps tendon, which would turn out to be career-ending, and Olajuwon would play just 44 games, as he recovered from hernia surgery and had respiratory problems this season. So Francis was thrust into much more offensive responsibility, and would respond well, as he led the team in scoring and would develop a strong bond with second-year guard and sixth man Cuttino Mobley, who would be second on the team in scoring. Francis's great rookie season saw him second among rookies in scoring, third in steals, and first in assists, and he would continue to show his great rebounding ability as he was fifth among rookies and second among point guards, behind only Gary Payton. And Francis would find himself at All-Star Weekend, and although he wasn't an NBA All-Star just yet, he would participate in the Rookie Challenge game and the dunk contest. And even though he had a great showing in the dunk contest, it was 2000 and no one was beating Vince Carter. Francis would have an efficient rookie season, shooting nearly 45% from the field and nearly 35% from deep. But his turnovers, which he would struggle with his entire career, would be the main negative of this season, as he averaged 4 per game. He would post 68 games in double figures, including 6 games with at least 30, and he would have 16 games with at least 10 assists and record 1 triple-double on January 27th, when he put up 25 points, 14 assists, and a career-high 17 rebounds. However, the Rockets had started the year at 2-10, and with injuries to Barkley and Olajuwon, they never found their footing, as they finished 34-48, which was their first losing record since 1984, as they missed the playoffs. Francis would be named to the All-Rookie First Team and be voted a co-Rookie of the Year, along with Elton Brand, as he would finish his first season with averages of about 18 points, 5.5 rebounds, 6.5 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. The Rockets had signed forward Maurice Taylor during the offseason to try and fill the void left by Barkley, and Mobley had been elevated to a starting role. as him and Francis would now form an undersized but high-scoring backcourt, as they combined for nearly 40 points per game. The Rockets were hoping to have Olajuwon back, but he would be sidelined with a foot injury before the season even began, and overall would play just 58 games this year, giving Francis more opportunity to improve and become the team's leader. And he did improve, as he had arguably his best season as a pro in just year 2. He upped his scoring, rebounding, and steals while shooting a career-high 45.1% from the field and 39.6% from deep, and had gotten his turnovers down to 3.3 per game. Francis would hit double figures in 75 games and record 2 triple-doubles this year, and his 6.9 rebounds per game would lead all point guards. The Rockets had both a scoring offense and defense in the top 10, and turned in a surprising 45 and 37 season. But this would still leave them 2 games out of the 8th and final playoff spot in an extremely competitive Western Conference. And Francis would avoid a sophomore slump by putting up averages of about 20 points, 7 rebounds, 6.5 assists, and a career-high 1.8 steals per game. And during the offseason, Francis would show his character by offering a sponsor dinner to hundreds of Maryland students who were affected by a September 24th tornado, which ripped through the Maryland campus. The 2002 season marked the end of an era in Houston. After 17 years as the face of the Rockets, Olajuwon was traded to the Toronto Raptors after he and Houston could not come to an agreement on a new contract. The Rockets did acquire a former All-Star during the offseason when they traded Shandon Anderson to the Knicks for an aging Glenn Rice. But their bad luck with aging stars would continue, as Rice only managed 20 games for the team due to a foot injury. But now, there was no question that the Rockets had become Francis's team, but his first season as the face of the Rockets would not go as planned. Rice wouldn't be the only one dealing with the foot injury, as Francis would miss almost all of December with a heel injury of his own, and would also miss 7 games with migraines, which was later diagnosed at season's end as Meniere's disease, which is caused by an abnormal buildup of fluid in the inner ear. So overall, Francis would only appear in 57 games this year, but would play a career-high 41.1 minutes per game. Mobley led the team in scoring, but Francis was right behind, with a career-high 21.6 points, as the two combined for over 43 points per game. Although Francis put up the best scoring mark of his career, his efficiency dropped significantly, as he shot below 42% from the field, and his turnovers went back up to nearly 4 per game. However, his career-high 7 rebounds per game would be second among point guards. He would score in double figures in all but 3 games, and have at least 12 times, while also recording 2 triple-doubles. And even though Francis struggled with injuries, he was still voted to his first All-Star game as a starter. But the Rockets struggled without Francis, as once he went down early in the year, a 7-5 Rockets team lost 15 straight and were never able to recover, finishing the year at 28-54 and missing the playoffs. But Francis's abbreviated season saw him average about 21.5 points, 7 rebounds, and 6.5 assists per game. Houston had roughly a 9% chance of securing the first overall pick of the 2002 draft, but they would win the lottery, and now have the opportunity to select a larger-than-life big man coming out of China. Yao Ming was now a Rocket, and was expected to continue the tradition of great big men in Houston, but was also expected to form an effective inside-outside tandem with Francis. Additionally, the Rockets locked up Francis long-term, when they signed him to a 6-year, $84 million deal. And Yao and Francis appeared to gel quickly. Francis would come back healthy and play and start in a career-high 81 games this year. He and Mobley would continue as a dynamic backcourt, and Yao would round it out as the only other player to average double figures, en route to a first-team all-rookie selection. Francis would have a couple of the best games of his career this year, both offensively and defensively, as he would drop a career-high 44 points to go along with 11 assists on over 57% shooting in a nationally televised January 17th game versus the Lakers, and would also record a career-high 8 steals in a November 24th game versus the Clippers. Both Francis and Yao would not only be voted to the All-Star game, but both be starters, with Francis scoring 20 points and dishing 9 assists in the game. The Rockets were looking good midway through the year, as they were sitting at 23-15 on January 17th. And although they still finished with the winning season, their 43-39 record would leave them a few games out of a playoff spot. And Francis's year saw him average about 21 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists per game. After being associated with the Rockets for 33 years as both a player and a coach, Tomjanovich stepped down after the season to focus on some serious health issues and was replaced by Jeff Van Gundy. And this was going to be a big change for Francis, as Tomljanovic had run a pretty open offense that was more supportive of Francis's extended dribbling and ISO ball. But Van Gundy was more focused on balanced play, with a focus on the post-up, as he didn't think having a score-first combo guard as your primary option would win games. And as Maurice Taylor would suggest years later, Van Gundy wanted to trade Francis from the beginning for this reason. So Francis and Van Gundy would clash over the course of the year, as Francis had his worst season as a pro up to that point, with career lows in scoring and efficiency, as the team displayed a more balanced scoring attack that had Yao now leading the team. And with the addition of Jim Jackson, 4 starters averaging double figures. Even with his down year, Francis was still voted as an all-star starter. However, this would be the final selection of his career. Van Gundy would also suspend Francis for 1 game during Super Bowl weekend, after Francis missed a team flight. Although both parties gave different explanations for why he was absent. The Rockets were a bottom 5 scoring offense, but boasted a top 5 scoring defense, and were sitting at 39 and 26 near the end of the year. But they went 6 and 11 the rest of the way, and stumbled to a 45 and 37 record. But this was still enough to get Francis his first taste of the postseason in a matchup with the LA Lakers. Although the series didn't go as Houston hoped, as they were defeated in 5 games, it was closer than it seemed, as 3 games were decided by single digits, and 2 of the Lakers' wins came by 4 points or less. Francis would up his play for the most part, as he led the team in scoring, assists, and steals, while finishing second in rebounds. He would record a Game 2 triple-double with 18 points, 10 rebounds, and 12 assists, and then follow that up in Game 3 with a postseason career high of 27, along with 9 rebounds and 7 assists in the Rockets' lone win of the series. But for as much as Francis excelled, he also hurt the team, as he averaged over 4 turnovers per game in the series, including a 7-turnover game in the Rockets' 1-point loss in Game 1. But overall, it was a great postseason debut, and Francis was looking forward to many more with the core of him, Yao, and Mobley. And for the regular season, he would average about 16.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals per game. Francis had joined elite company, as he, along with Oscar Robertson, Magic Johnson, and Grant Hill, were the only players at the time to average 15 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists in their first 5 seasons. But the relationship between Francis and Van Gundy was rocky, and Van Gundy wanted to unload Francis to focus on running a half-court offense centered around Yao, and the back-to-back reigning scoring champ in Orlando had just requested a trade. So on June 29th, Francis was the main piece in a package sent to Orlando for superstar Tracy McGrady. Francis would say that he understands the business and wasn't bitter, but at the same time felt they were building something special in Houston. And luckily for Francis, although he had to leave his friend Yao, he would be accompanied by his other good friend on the team, as Mobley had been included in the trade. Francis would get another chance to play with the first overall big man, as the Magic had selected high school phenom Dwight Howard in the 2004 draft just days earlier. The team also featured Grant Hill, who had joined the team 4 years earlier, along with McGrady, but chronic foot issues had limited him to 47 games in the past 4 years, including sitting out the whole 2004 season. Francis would return to a more run-and-gun system, which he was more comfortable with, and in turn, he would produce at the level of his pre-Van Gundy days, as he had the second highest scoring mark of his career and averaged a career-high 7 assists, as he put up double figures in 75 of the 78 games he played. His efficiency was still an issue though, as he shot below 43% from the field and below 30% from deep, while also committing a career-high 4.1 turnovers per game. Howard would have a great rookie season, as he became the first player directly out of high school to start all 82 games, as well as the youngest player to average a double-double and to average 10 rebounds a game. Hill would have his healthiest season in years, as he appeared in 67 games and combined with Francis to average 41 points per game. The Magic were a fun team to begin the year, as Francis was delivering a lot of clutch moments, and after about a month, they were first in the Eastern Conference with a surprising 13-6 record. But then about a month later, with the Magic at 18-15, Mobley, who was slated to be a free agent at the end of the year, was traded to Sacramento for Doug Christie, which upset Francis, and his frustration was clear, as he would be ejected from a game versus New Jersey on March 13th, then suspended for 3 games after kicking a cameraman in a game versus Seattle a week later. Chemistry and morale had taken a big hit, and although the Magic were in playoff contention late in the year at 31-27, they collapsed and went 5-19 the rest of the way, with Hill missing 13 of the final 27 games of the season to finish the year at 36-46 and miss the playoffs. and for the regular season, Francis averaged about 21.5 points, 6 rebounds, and 7 assists per game. The Magic brought in former head coach Brian Hill during the offseason, and similar to when the Rockets brought in Van Gundy, Francis and Hill clashed, as Hill ran a more motion-heavy offense. Grant Hill's injury issues returned, and he managed only 21 games this year. But Howard continued to improve and was now the team's second leading scorer. Francis was still the team's top scorer, but his unhappiness was evident in his play, as his numbers dropped across the board and he was attempting the least amount of shots in his career. But the culmination of his rocky relationship with Hill came in a January 11th game versus Seattle, when he refused to re-enter the game late in a blowout loss and was suspended for 2 games because of it. But this was the last straw, and the Magic placed Francis on the trading block, and that decision was made easier due to the great play of second-year point guard Jameer Nelson. Francis would appear in 16 more games for the Magic. Then on February 22nd, he was sent to New York, as the Knicks sent over the expiring contracts of Trevor Ariza and Anthony Hardaway. Unfortunately for Francis, his time in New York was doomed from the beginning. The Knicks already possessed a shoot-first combo guard in Stephon Marbury, and it was known that he and coach Larry Brown did not get along. Surprisingly, Brown lobbied for the Francis trade by suggesting to GM Isaiah Thomas that Francis and Marbury could replicate the success of the legendary Knicks backcourt of Walt Frazier and Earl Monroe. However, Marbury would later suggest that Brown didn't want Francis. He just hoped acquiring a similar player to Marbury would force the Knicks to trade or waive him. But this backfired, as Francis and Marbury quickly became close, leading Brown to dislike Francis as well. The Knicks were 15-38 at the time of the trade, so there wasn't any hope for their season. But it was a chance to let Francis and Marbury begin to build chemistry. But this wouldn't really materialize, as Brown rarely played them together, opting for one or the other to come off the bench and have either Jamal Crawford or Quentin Richardson start at the 2-guard position. Francis would play 24 games for the Knicks, but start just 15 of them, as his 27.5 minutes per game were the lowest of his career up to that point. His numbers dropped across the board due to lack of playing time, but he was surprisingly efficient, as he shot over 44% from the field and nearly 54% from deep. The Knicks would win just 8 games after the Francis trade, and they finished 23-59. And for his overall regular season, Francis would average about 14.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. Brown was fired after the year, and Thomas would assume coaching duties for the 07 season. The Knicks were bringing virtually the same core back, but would be overrun by injuries, as Crawford, Richardson, and second-year forward David Lee would all miss at least 23 games. But none of them missed as many games as Francis, who was hampered by knee tendonitis all year, and only appeared in 44 contests with 30 starts, as he put up the lowest numbers of his career. The Knicks started the year at 9-17, and although they still had a losing record, they were sitting at 29-34 after 63 games, which had them tied for the final playoff spot in the East. But they would win just 4 out of their final 19 games to finish 33-49 and miss the playoffs. And the Francis and Marbury experience didn't prove to be very successful, as in the 36 games that they started together, the Knicks went just 11-25, and Francis's season would end with him averaging about 11.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. During the offseason, on draft night, Francis and Channing Frye were traded to Portland for a package headlined by big man Zach Randolph. But Portland had no intention of keeping Francis, as they bought out the final 2 years of his contract, making him a free agent for the first time in his career. There were a few teams who were interested in his services, but on July 20th, he would choose to go back where it all began and sign with Houston, as he was reunited with Yao and was also joining the player he was traded for years earlier. Houston fans loved having Francis back, but his season would barely get off the ground. He hadn't made the team's regular rotation going into the year and would appear in just 10 games with 3 starts, before suffering a torn quadriceps tendon that would end his year in early February. And his brief season saw him average about 5.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. Francis came into training camp prior to the 09 season 15 pounds lighter, but wasn't able to play as he was still recovering from his injury. And then, before seeing any action, he was traded to Memphis on December 24th, and then about a month later, he would be waived by the Grizzlies before making an appearance, effectively ending his career. Francis would briefly play for the Beijing Ducks in late 2010, but would leave the team after 4 games. Steve Francis's legacy would unfortunately be marred by attitude issues and clashes with coaches. He was labeled as selfish and greedy from the moment he was drafted, but that doesn't seem to be the whole story, as there's nothing to suggest he wasn't a great teammate or didn't care about winning. He was just someone that had supreme confidence and maybe a bit of an ego, who thought that he needed to be the focal point of a team to give them the best chance to win. But on the court, Francis gave it his all every game. He may have been more inclined to score, but that's not to say that he didn't get his teammates involved. And he wasn't afraid to do the dirty work, as he's one of the best rebounding guards in NBA history. He put up rarely seen numbers during his prime in Houston, where on top of being one of the league's top guards, he was also one of the most exciting players. His handles were second to none, and he was so good at lulling defenders to sleep before blowing by them for a huge dunk or acrobatic layup. He brought excitement to Rockets basketball during a transition period, and although he had just one playoff appearance in his career, he elevated his game during that series, and it's too bad he didn't have more postseason opportunities. He had an underrated stint in Orlando, which may have gone differently if not for the Mobley trade, before he would be entering into an unfair situation in New York. Injuries caught up to him quickly, and he wasn't able to finish his career the way he wanted to. And it's probably true that he wasn't the type of player you could build your franchise around, and would have been much better suited in a complementary role had he been willing to accept that. But when he was healthy, you had to be on your A game, because if you weren't, you'd be on the wrong end of a highlight. And if there's one thing that's certain, it's that you didn't want to find yourself on an island with Stevie Franchise. But that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you like this one, check out this one on the man he dominated during his JUCO days, or this one on his brief teammate in Houston. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.